Hola, ¿qué tal? Muy buenas. ¿Cómo están ustedes? Bienvenidos nuevamente a nuestro canal. Hoy día tenemos un entrevistado súper interesante y queremos a través de conociendo su empresa, conociendo lo que él hace, ver las oportunidades de negocios que hay en Brasil. Para eso, hoy día tenemos a un entrevistado de lujo. Su nombre es don Mario Lewandowski. Mi disculpas, Mario, porque espero ahora haber pronunciado bien su nombre. La entrevista la vamos a hacer en inglés. Él se siente más cómodo en inglés, así que vamos con ello. Mario, what is AGBI? What does the acronym stand for, and how long the company have been in force?
AGBI is a asset management company. We're Brazilian-based, São Paulo-based. Originally, we were agribusiness investments, but since 2015, we have dabbled in some real estate investments as well. It was founded by Luciano Lewandowski, which is my father. He's an asset manager here in Brazil, had one of the largest real estate funds, or rather the largest real estate fund in Brazil during the early 2000s. And in 2012, together with a new team, we set a new strategy focused on rural and agricultural real estate. Essentially, AGBI Real Assets, as the name implies, focuses on real assets, especially farms. We buy degraded pasture lands in Brazil, and we convert them into cropland, as in most parts of Latin America, especially the ones that are agriculturally heavy. As it's common knowledge, pastoral land is less valuable than agricultural land. So through the transformation process, we capture a lot of capital gains. We're heading into our third fund right now. We were established in 2012. So we're about to complete 10 years of age experience and thankfully a lot of success.
Okay, well, you already told something about in which area, but we would like to know more about that. Where do you operate today? Is only in Brazil? Do you operate somewhere else? And especially in which area do you prefer to work?
Well, we're exclusively focused in Brazil at the moment because we understand that Brazil is an up-and-coming, well, that's actually an established and up-and-coming agricultural star. If you have a look at the Brazilian economy, you will see that in 2020, about 26% of all the GDP growth was from the ag sector. Brazil is the largest sugar exporter in the world, the largest citrus exporter in the world, the second largest soybean exporter in the world. It's a very ag-heavy country. And it has a lot of technology and a lot of infrastructure for agricultural exports. So we understand that we have our hands full with good opportunities over here. And it's also a very complicated market to work with. So it's a big differential to have Brazilian people that understand the financial markets dabbling into agriculture. We're very much focused in Brazil as a whole, specifically in the Cerrado region. The Cerrado region is the region that is below the Amazon and further north from the Atlantic region of Brazil, especially the state of Mato Grosso do Sul, and Goiás, which are places that are particularly good for agriculture. The quality of the soil is relatively decent, especially with all of the technology that Brazilian agriculture has developed to better the quality of the soil. And the rainfall, which is a very important part of agriculture as a whole, and therefore an important part of land value, the rainfall is very steady. It's possibly the most steady rainfall pattern in all of the world, which makes this region in particular probably the best region in the world for agriculture.
Great. You mentioned there's another companies like yours, but what are their AGBI's strengths?
Actually, there's very few asset managing companies focused on agriculture. We've been in this market since 2012. Starting in 2015, some other asset managers started looking into agriculture. Mainly, the companies that work with ag are the ones that are focused on production. So we're talking about tradings, we're talking about companies like, for example, Amagi, which are companies that are focused on the production itself and not on the financial aspect and the land acquisition. That is something that AGBI started with back in 2012. And our largest differential is most likely our experience. Because although there's a lot of agricultural producers and rural producers in Brazil, there's very few producers with a profound knowledge of finance. And although there's plenty of asset managers in Brazil with know-how in real estate, there's very few real estate asset managers that understand how the field works. For example, a very interesting thing about this crossroads between agriculture and finance is that most of the land acquisition and sales in Brazil, and I believe throughout all of the world, they're not pegged in reais or pegged in dollars. They're pegged in bags of soybean or in bushels of corn. The currency for the agricultural business and the currency for land trade in the agricultural business is usually pegged to the production itself, because that's how the farmer has a better insight of how much his land is going to be worth or it's going to cost, and so on and so forth. And some of those little quirks are the things that that only experience brings.
Okay, great. Tell us a little bit about your company. I mean, your work team. What part of your team? How many people do they work? How's the chart? Huh? The organization chart.
We're a very focused team. Right now, our team is 7 members. Luciano Lewandowski, which is my father and the founder, is our head fundraiser. He helped develop the strategy with Gustavo Fonseca, the other partner. Other than that, we're composed of analysts. All of our analysts are their background usually is in engineer or economics, but everybody has some sort of connection to the rural area and to the field. We like to joke around that although we're used to doing all of the valuation calculations and the financial calculations, everybody in AGBI at some moment has to step on the dirt, in the sense that you have to understand how the countryside works, how the farmers think, because that's our market. We're a very small company in the sense that we do a lot of valuations and we do a lot of research on agricultural land. We've researched over 555 farms all over Brazil. That's probably the largest portfolio you'll find in land valuation in Brazil, with the exception of maybe some banks that finance rural production. But we can do that with a very small team because we're very focused.
Okay. Thinking about the South American market, what would be the appeal of trading with you and why?
There's a very interesting point to that question, Juan. Right now, I'm not in Sao Paulo. Right now, I am in Uruguay, in Montevideo. And we're talking to some investors over here because we're about to launch our fund number 3. And the interesting thing about when you talk specifically to people from Uruguay or from Argentina, because of the agricultural background of some of these countries, they understand what the market is and how the market works. The whole land market in agriculture, there's an interesting fact about this, and this applies to maybe Midwestern USA as well, which is when people make money in our countries, usually they buy land. And they'll have a farm where they're going to have some crops. They'll also use it for leisure at some point. So in the natural people and in family offices and so on and so forth, usually they understand a little bit more about farms. And Latin America as a whole, as a large agricultural producer, and as economies that have a lot of ag, a lot of weight on ag, it's easier for you to talk about agriculture, as opposed to other countries that have financial markets that maybe are a little bit more developed and they're trading in advanced and complex securities. They'll be talking about bonds, and sometimes they'll lose track of the underlying assets. Whereas when we talk here in Latin America in particular, the assets are still very much connected to their real assets. So, for example, here in Montevideo, we're talking to some of our investors. A lot of them, they have farms of their own, and they produce in their own. What we bring as AGBI, as a professional fund, is we bring the capacity to scale. And when you're talking about ag, scaling is absolutely essential.
Okay, understood. You mentioned something about the how big is Brazil and the opportunity, but thinking about South American investors, why invest in Brazil?
Well, what we do here is very much focused on the part of the land itself, which is connected to the valuation. It's important to mention, for example, that when we talk about productivity, the land productivity in Brazil is particularly astonishing. It's amazing, actually. If you consider that in 1995, so about 30 years ago, we were planting about 81,000 tons of soybeans. Right now, 30 years after, we're producing 266,000 tons. Whereas the planted area has basically not increased. It's went from 40 to 60. So we're talking about a 4 to 5 time increase in production as opposed to a less than 2 times increase in planted land. So we're talking about a lot of technology. And that's very interesting. That's something that's been for people who are in the ag sector, that's very obvious. We see the technology that's being put into the ag sector right now here in Brazil. They talk a lot about what they call ag techs, which are startups and technology companies focused in agriculture, and that has made the ag sector a very hot spot for investments in technology. But if you consider that Brazil was not traditionally a very productive agricultural economy. Before the 1980s, the land in Brazil wasn't very suitable to planting some of the cash crops that we're used to right now. For example, soybeans in particular, soybeans weren't a good fit for the Brazilian Midwest, for the Brazilian Cerrado region. But through a lot of technology input through Embrapa, which is the Brazilian agricultural research agency, it's a governmental agency focused on researching technology in agriculture. Embrapa helped develop, together with some of the large tradings, we developed better seeds, we developed better procedures, better fertilizers, and all of this technology has come into the agricultural sector. So when you ask about good types of investments, definitely agriculture in Brazil is something that is off the charts. Not only because of the scale of the country, but also because of the technology that's put in. Sometimes we think that technology is something that's only related to industrial goods or to services. But when you look at the Brazilian case study, and this isn't only valid for Brazil, this is very valid for Uruguay, very valid for Argentina as well. When you look to the agricultural sectors of some of the Latin American countries, you realize that there is a lot of technology in the rural and in the rural areas of our countries. And it kind of breaks a little of the stigma that suggests that agriculture is something backwards or that it's something simple. If you try to buy a farm and plant right now, Juan, I mean no disrespect, but it's going to take you a while to be able to understand all of the details, complexities, and technologies that some of our farmers are used to doing from as soon as they start walking the fields.
Okay, you're going to the next question, and with that, which are the main problems or challenge that exist in Brazil for foreign investor, and how can you support them?
Okay, I think there's three big points to mention. The first main point, and we've been facing this a lot for the last couple of years, there's a currency risk. I mean, a lot of investors in Brazil managed to get a lot of good returns in the country, but they lost some of these returns to currency risk. That's something that's a macroeconomic question. We have elections coming up in 2022. That should be a good indicator of the economic policy as a whole. The second large risk is an infrastructure question, but then again, infrastructure is a large problem not only in Brazil but in most developing countries, which is we're already the second largest producer in most every agricultural good, but we still have a hard time taking them to the port. So that on one side, that's an investment challenge. On the other side, that's an opportunity because as soon as those problems are solved, you're definitely going to have an appreciation. And the third question is the legislation itself, specifically the legislation for land and agricultural investments in Brazil. They require somebody with boots on the ground. A lot of the investors that don't have a partnership with somebody inside of Brazil, they have a hard time understanding all of the legislations and all of the red tape that you have to work with when investing in Brazil. We're actually having a lot of success with our conversations with other Latin American investors because we're understanding that a lot of the red tape and a lot of the bureaucracy that we have in Brazil, it's a regional cultural thing. When we talk about some of our problems with investors from Uruguay, with investors from from Colombia, from Venezuela, obviously in different levels, but we deal with some of the same problems regarding legislation, regarding taxes, and so on and so forth.
Okay. On your website, you report that the price of farms in Brazil has not stopped rising in recent years. It seems that it's a great business to invest in this area. Tell us what is happening and how you can invest in agribusiness and carbon credits in Brazil, and how do you support the potential investors in Brazil?
That's a very good question, specifically because, as I mentioned, a lot of what we do, we're not reinventing the wheel. My grandfather came to Brazil 70 years ago, and he bought a little piece of land, a farm. What happened is, as the country grows and develops, infrastructure eventually arrives. So land has a tendency to appreciate. Even when it doesn't appreciate, it has a tendency to not lose value, especially if it's cultivated. If you find a good land in a place that there's a good rainwater pattern, in a place where you have all the infrastructure and the technology to make the betterments necessary, your land will improve. We have a couple of studies, and this is basically our bread and butter in AGBI. We have a couple of studies that suggest that there's an arbitration opportunity between pasture land and cropland. As soon as you convert a pasture land to a cropland, so as soon as you buy a pasture land that's used for cattle and you transform it to a cropland that will produce soybeans and corn, you have automatically about 100% appreciation in the land value because of the transformation. I like to trace a parallel with the real estate market because this is where Luciano came with the inspiration for all of our strategy. When you buy a site and you raise on top of that site a warehouse, automatically that site is more valuable because now it can be used industrially. In the same sense, when you buy a pasture land and you make the investment necessary to transform it into a cropland, automatically you raise its value. So it's something that doesn't depend on the market itself. It depends more on the investment capabilities of whoever is buying the land and making the transformation. The second point that's very interesting, and it touches the carbon market that you mentioned, the pressure for the reduction of deforestation is something that is very strong in the world, and it isn't something that is new, although it's been receiving more and more attention every year. The market in Brazil has a very strong commitment, especially the serious agricultural players in Brazil, a strong commitment to reduce deforestation because that actually hinders our sales abroad, especially in Europe and some other countries, because there are things like the soy moratorium, which companies won't buy soybeans from places that have deforestation. There are things like the Cerrado Manifest, which is an international pact to not buy any products from places where there's been some sort of degradation in the Cerrado lands. So what is this made? This actually forced the larger Brazilian agriculture to better their techniques in order to increase production and productivity without the increase of land. For example, AGBI has been in the market for almost 10 years now, and we have not taken down any hectare of forests anywhere, and we still have growing and growing returns. How come? Because of the technology we put in. We better our procedures. We're always looking for other forms of increasing our returns. And one of those examples is carbon credits. Our fund number 3 is going to increase a strategy that we've already started to adopt in our fund number 2, which is some technologies have started to be able to measure how much carbon has been sequestered inside the land. Because when you transform a pasture land to a cropland, you're growing products, be it a soybean, be it the grass that covers the soybean, be it the corn, and all of this production and all these plants that are being planted, they inject carbon into the soil. And we've just partnered up with a company, with an ag tech, that has managed to use a technology to measure how much carbon is captured. This is obviously verified by the gold standard, by Vera, the international certifiers. And with that, we're actually being able to bring another option of return into our investments, which is not only do we sell the crops, not only do we have a land appreciation because of the transformation, but now we can also generate carbon credits that can be sold out, whether on a voluntary or a regulated market, so that companies that produce more or that emit more carbon equivalent gases can buy our credits to neutralize their emissions.
Oh, great. Great. I didn't know that. Well, do you support in the purchase an operation of the farm or just the purchase?
Right now, because our focus is on the purchase, we are partnered up with middle to large producers, operators, and they do the transformation for us. They do the operation for us. Why did we choose this model in AGBI? For two reasons. First of all, the medium-sized producers in Brazil have a very hard time finding credit to finance the expansion of their production. And these guys, they would rather have their money invested in production than to immobilize their capital in land. So we buy the land, we rent the land off to the producer. He manages to pay for all of the transformation. That means AGBI does not pay for the transformation. We charge a rent over somebody who's producing on the land. That gives us a fixed income, and that gives the producer an opportunity to expand his business and get more money off of the operation. Right now, after 10 years of taking that strategy onto market, we're starting to consider operating some of our farms ourselves. But right now, we have a very positive relationship with the operators, because if they're not looking for AGBI, they're probably going to have to take credit on a bank or take credit on a money lending fund or firm, and the conditions are much more of a credit condition than a partnership as it is with AGBI. So at this moment, we're not operating, but we're starting to look into it, because at some point you're owning so much land, it makes sense for you to take a little piece of the operation.
Great. Mario, maybe I'm wrong, but according to what I read in your website, it seems that the real estate investment is part of your business. I think it's 80%. Tell me if I'm wrong with that. How is the support that you provide in that area?
First of all, it's important to mention that real estate, we consider real estate, obviously the traditional industrial real estate. We do work with BTSs and so on and so forth. But what we do in our farms essentially is a real estate play.
Okay.
We talk about ag because it is inherently agricultural, but it is a real estate play because we buy land, we incorporate value into that land, not through a building, but through the transformation, and then we sell the asset. Our first investment, we just moved out of it. It was 8 years long investment, and we had 4.5 times the return in the capital. So we're talking about some absurdly large numbers, as long as you have the discipline to stick firm to the strategy throughout the 8 to 10 year period.
Okay. Do you have a minimum investor amount in order to work with as a foreign investors?
Our funds usually work with 1 million reais investment minimum. They're usually closed funds or club deals. AGBI does not work with publicly listed funds. So, and we're talking about reais. Our fund number 3, which is about to be launched this month, will be a 500 million reais fund. Our last fund was liquidated for 180 million reais. So we talk about a 1 million real minimum investment. Usually we're talking to family offices, we're talking to institutional investors, because they're closed funds and they can't even be offered publicly. I'm mentioning about these funds here because they haven't been launched yet. but as soon as they're launched, they're going to be very focused. We talk a lot about our strategy because we understand that it's a good strategy that has to be replicated. And this is a market that deserves more liquidity.
Okay, great. Thinking about a South American investor, what guarantees do you give to the investors? And what is the process like if someone decides to invest in Brazil?
Okay. With regards to guarantees, we work in our funds in AGBI, we work with a hurdle. We talk usually about about 5 to 7% over inflation. And this is an interesting point because inflation in Brazil, depending on where your investment's made, it plays a big part. So we're talking about a hurdle of 5 to 7 over inflation. In regards to guarantees, we do not work with guarantees, but as I mentioned, we have ample studies and ample research that talks about the lack of depreciation in the land. So what we bought the land for, we're pretty sure we're going to be able to sell for more if we get our track record, and we're one of the few companies that has a track record because we've been in this for so long. Our track record suggests usually over 100% capital gains in the investments. As to the process for the investment, we usually ask for the investors to, some investors in particularly come looking for us. Recently, we started talking to some Asian companies that are interested in secondary positions. So our fund is already closed. We're already dealing with it. Somebody wants to buy off one of our older investors in order to make a play or take a stake in the game. We usually ask for the investors to look for us directly, and whenever our funds are launched, since they're closed funds, they will usually be distributed by a bank in particular.
Right. Well, Mario, we are ending an interview, but before ending, we would like to have a message for you to the South American potential investor. Which is your personal view about this, and what would you suggest?
Okay. First of all, thank you for the conversation. It's very good, and thank you for this opportunity. I have two things that I have to say. The first thing I think, which is the most important, is a lot of people have been talking about ESG, sustainability, and some people think that sustainability is something that has a direct conflict with agriculture. This is not right. That is a false statement. Responsible agriculture is sustainable in its essence. Because whenever you buy land to produce on it, if you degrade the land, you're going to decrease your yield, your future yield. So this is a very important point. If you're looking for agricultural investments, check to see who are the people that are working the land. Check to see how responsible the companies are, because you can't have one thing without the other. The second thing, we're taking a very strong and excited position on carbon credits. Fund number 3 not only will have the capital play, but it will also have a carbon capture strategy through agriculture. And we're very excited because we feel that not only are we going to be bringing very good returns to our investors, but we really feel like we're part of something bigger. We feel that we might be able, and this is valid for Brazil, but this is valid for most of Latin America. We have the opportunity to capture credits, to capture carbon credits and sell them to the rest of the world. We can bring some of the sustainable environmental benefits that the whole world needs and actually make a profit out of it. As long as we have enough people understanding the importance of this and investing on it. Because like any other development, sustainable development needs investments.
Great, Mario. Thank you very much for your time. I hope you're going to have a lot of new clients from South America. Well, let's see. We can do another interview from here for another time.
Thank you very much, Juan. Whenever you need anything, if you want to talk about Brazil as a whole, we're at your disposition. And specifically to talk about sustainability of carbon credits in agriculture, we love this. We do this because we like it, not only because of the good returns.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.